It's been almost 50 years since the M1 beat the Leopard 2, and I know I touched on this before in a different video, but I don't feel like I went very in-depth, and there were some things that I didn't explain very well, so I figured I'd take more of a deep dive looking into why the Leopard 2 lost against the M1 Abrams. Now I do want to shout out a video from one of my friends, Dalek14MC. He made a much longer video and talks about things like why the M1 Abrams isn't a copy of the Leopard 2. I'm going to be talking more about the technical aspects of why the Leopard 2 lost, so after this video check out his. Now we have to go back to the MBT-70 program. You might remember that the MBT-70 program was an attempt to make a common main battle tank for NATO. It was a collaboration between the US and Germany. The two nations really couldn't agree on much, and it was far too expensive. So eventually they just decided to part ways and make their own tanks. But NATO still wanted interoperability with their tanks. They wanted to use the same ammo, same fuel, same repair tools, stuff like that. So Germany offered to sell their tank, the Leopard 2, to the US. And if it turned out that the US didn't want it, they would still try to use common components. Germany sent a modified version of the Leopard 2, the Leopard 2AV. Some people think this means Americanized version, but it means austere version, because it was made to be less expensive and meet US requirements. One requirement was having a 105mm gun, and people often say that this is stupid, they should have gone with the 120, but we'll touch on that later. It's often said that the 2AV wasn't selected so that US industry could be bailed out, but this doesn't make sense for a few reasons. First of all, it would have been produced under license by FMC, and it used a lot of US components. In 1976, the 2AV was trialed against the XM1. As far as how testing went, there are a ton of misunderstandings, so I'll try to break it down. The main takeaways were that the vehicles were more or less equal in most respects, but the 2AV had a slightly better fire control system. Its protection was also worse, it had worse survivability, and worse gun handling. As far as the US was concerned, armor and survivability were the main factors. So for the 2AV to fail in those respects wasn't great. When designing the XM1, the US put survivability above all else. Now, when it's said that the 2AV had worse armor, it's actually a bit more complex than that. When defeating kinetic threats, the 2AV's armor is actually better. The issue was its coverage. The 2AV didn't have composite in the side of the turret, and it didn't have composite side skirts. Now, this doesn't matter much when you're fighting tanks, but for RPGs and autocannons, it's a pretty big deal. For the US, those were the main threats the tanks are going to be dealing with. And generally that's pretty true. Tank-on-tank engagements are pretty rare. But these aren't why the 2AV wasn't selected. As mentioned in a previous video, the 2AV that the US tested didn't have composite installed. Normally this wouldn't be an issue. It's not like it was actually being shot at anyway. That's why a ballistic hull and turret were provided alongside it. The problem is that Germany lied about its weight. The upper weight limit for the program was 58 tons. When the US asked for loaded combat weight of the vehicle, Germany replied, it's 59.6 tons, to which the US said, okay, that's fine, we can get a waiver for it. In lieu of armor, Germany added ballast to simulate the correct weight. The US delegation was never told that the armor wasn't there, not until they confronted the Germans about it. When the US took the weight of the composite inserts, taken from the ballistic hull and turret, and added it to the 2AV pilot, the actual weight was around 63 tons. This is obviously well over the weight limit. Whether this scandal was a result of a misunderstanding or deliberate action, it brought the results of the tests into question. Specifically, how would the extra weight affect components? While this fiasco certainly soured the US on the entire deal, this still wasn't the main reason the 2AV wasn't chosen. According to a study conducted by FMC, and remember, this is the company licensing the 2AV for the US, the 2AV would have been 25% more expensive to produce than the XM1. Cost was the most important factor for the US. That's why the Chrysler XM1 was chosen. There were some other squabbles as well, such as Germany believing that if the 2AV was chosen, it wouldn't need to go through the full-scale engineering development phase. To the US, this was rushing a product into service before it was ready. As for the reason why Germany wanted to ignore this phase, it's because if the 2AV was chosen, production would start 26 months later than the XM1. Shortly afterward, Germany withdrew the 2AV. To this day, people assert the XM1 was inferior, but I don't think that's the case at all. Why would you buy a product that is slightly better in some areas, inferior in more areas, and these are the areas you care most about, would cost more, would arrive late, and to top it all off, the company is being misleading? And I know that people will say, but oh, the Leopard 2 was better, it had a 120. The US went with the 105 for very good reasons. First, it reduced both cost and weight. Second, the 105 was used by most NATO tanks, so if new ammo was developed for the M1, it could be dispersed to the rest of the fleet. And third, at that time, the 120 wasn't really that much better than the 105. You have to keep in mind, the contemporary to M774 was DM13. The contemporary to M833 was DM23. DM33 wouldn't come along until 1987, and by that point the US had much better 120 ammo. Basically, by the time the 120 surpassed the 105, the US was already using the 120. And while they wanted the 105 originally, they recognized that the 120 had greater growth potential, so they agreed to use it later on. And as part of this agreement, Germany was supposed to use the AGT-1500 in Leopard 2. Obviously, this didn't happen. The Government Accounting Office, a third party in this ordeal, noted that Germany's requirements for the turbine were incredibly unfair, basically impossible in some circumstances. The US also noted that while they were willing to accept the 2AV if it won, Germany never agreed to do the same with the XM1, so when you think about it, they really didn't have much to lose. So in light of all of this, I don't understand how people can make Germany out to be the underdog here. They seem more like sore losers than anything else. People associated with the Leopard 2 say that the program was unfair, saying that they had the quote-unquote feeling that the 2AV never had a chance, but that's all they say. Just feelings, no evidence. The closest thing I could find to evidence was this. In 1972, the Army already evaluated the Leopard 2, and it was rejected. In the opinion of the XM1 project manager, he thought the XM1 was superior, as did Chrysler and GM. Personal opinions aren't really evidence though. Even after the testing and weight scandal, the US still said they might purchase the Leopard 2, if it was more cost effective, which it wasn't. Can we please just come to a common agreement? The Abrams was probably the best tank for the US, and the Leopard 2 is probably the best tank for Germany. Both tanks are good, and were chosen for good reasons. Anyway, I hope that cleared some things up. If you guys enjoyed the video, let me know. And if you've got a video topic idea, let me know about that as well. I'll see you on the next one.